Guess we're going to go ahead and get on to our program proper here. Are we? Yes, we are. So for those of you joining us online, thank you so much for making us part of your day. For those of you here in person, thank y'all too. Y'all are pretty great. If you're watching this on YouTube, remember to smash that like button, as the kids say. Subscribe to HSGP on YouTube. You can find us on Patreon, or you can visit us at hsgp.org and become a member. I became a member, and look at me. It worked out pretty well. So highly recommended membership with HSGP. All right, it's one of the smartest things you'll ever do. Anyway. So we're pretty excited today because we have a wonderful speaker that's going to be joining us to talk about stuff that directly fits into our mission as humanists and what it is that we're trying to do with the world and what we would like our community and indeed our planet to look like. We have Doug Nintzel that's going to be joining us. Doug's a pretty interesting guy. He on the professional side, he works in tech. He worked for TI for a number of years, so thank you for my wonderful TI-83 calculator. I still got it at home. It still serves me well. And currently, Doug works for Intel. So thank you for my Pentium 2 processor. It still serves me well. We're excited to have Doug here. Doug actually started this group right here, Unity Initiative. And their goal is to help build communities that essentially work on self-reflection, examining one's own prejudices, and indeed combating racism where it exists, just taking it head on. Because if you don't do that, I assure you, the folks that are pushing racist ideas, they're not going to back down. So you have to have that counterbalance to push back against them, and that's what Doug's organization, a large part of what they do. So at this point, I'd like to welcome up Doug Nintzel. Come on, give it a big HSGP welcome to Doug Nintzel. Thank you for coming, Doug.
Can you guys hear me? Does this work? It's working? All right. Thank you. I want to thank Jared. Jared, I met at Project Humanities. It's a homeless reach out put on by a group at ASU, and he invited me to come here. And thank you to Catherine for all the questions she's answered. I have a friend in the crowd out here, Emily. Emily is a Unity Initiative member. And so after this, if anyone has questions, you can ask me, you can ask Emily. This group is not Unity Initiative, so I probably should have held this, but this is what we go through our typical introductions during our events. So Unity, a lot of people go, oh yeah, I know Unity Church, and it's not related to any church. Unity Unity Initiative is meant to. The idea is to unite people of all diversities, especially diversities based on some kind of attribute, whether it's an identity attribute or a physical character attribute. So we're first and foremost, we're an anti-racist organization seeking to build the beloved community. Cass gave a great intro on that. And we have so we want to do self-reflection. Kat's mentioned that. We have the 12 steps. How many in here have heard of the 12 steps programs? Okay, so some of you may be going, don't those mention God? Okay, so yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, I have it on another slide. So Unity Initiative members, we acknowledge that without reservation, that racism and against BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and sexism are problems in our society and within ourselves. We don't just point to those racists over there, right? We look at how has racism affected us? How have we adapted racist ideas? How do we contribute to racist structures? We're here to support Unity Initiative's endeavors towards racism and anti-racism, anti-sexism, and any other form of discrimination to heal our own prejudice. We want to learn and align with values of anti-racism, anti-sexism, and to support and to unite other anti-racist and anti-sexist. We're not here to argue or to debate racism is a problem or to try to detract from efforts of UI. So we always have something similar to this. It's not this exact slide, but it's very close to this exact slide, where we because we've had people join us on Zoom who want to let us know that we're just a bunch of tree-hugging hippies and liberals, and we don't. There's no racism isn't a problem, and sexism aren't problems. So we're not here to argue that. The people coming into our group are unreservedly acknowledge these are problems and want to be part of the solution. So this is different. This is a different group where I would normally talk, because usually the groups that I talk to, it's clear that they unreservedly hold those values. But in this group, I don't know where you guys stand. I don't know what your political beliefs are, what your values are with diversity, equity, inclusion. There's certainly there's certainly a lot of pushback on that in the country, right? So let me go on, and we'll talk a little more about that.
You're safe.
All right. Good, good, good. I have a slide about it we'll still go through, because hopefully you'll find some humor in it. We have a book. I have some books in here that we give away for free. I have some more in the car also, if anyone would like a Unity Initiative book. We usually give them out at meetings. We have a PDF. I can give you the link to the PDF if anyone's interested. If you need to get in touch with me, I'll maybe mention this more. I have some cards that have unityinitiative.org on it, and if you go to the contacts, that email will come to me with any questions anyone has. It's a pretty lame website, but we're going to update it eventually. So we are anti-racist, anti-sexist, diverse, non-sectarian, non-political, not religious, non-violent, rooted in love, seeking truth, seeking unity, self-healing, and learning. We want to unite people of all diversities into a harmonious community to foster an environment for overcoming prejudice. We have these 4 pillars. Education of, actually I have a slide for each one, so let me just go through those. So the first pillar is education, and this is about learning about anti-racism, learning about the problems that our country is facing with racism, educating yourself on the history of our country, especially from the foundation when slavery was brought into this country, and the end of slavery, Jim Crow laws, understanding all that history really helps in having discussions with other people, and also getting that knowledge within yourself to get resolve about how we're going to move forward. The next one is building the beloved community, which is trying to build a more diverse community. I mean, you look at this room, and by far the vast majority of people would probably be considered white or white passing. Not everybody in this room, obviously, but the majority of the people in this room. Why is that? Well, this isn't meant to be a guilt thing, but if you look at the history of our country, segregation was enforced by law and by violence if you tried to cross racial boundaries, right? I mean, there were severe consequences regardless of your color. And then eventually those laws were outlawed, but 245 years had passed with those being in place, and so it just became self-perpetuating. And to live in a safe environment, all of us were raised in white neighborhoods or black neighborhoods, whatever, wherever your family landed there. And so this is to try to explicitly take action to cross racial boundaries to start developing those relationships. So pillar 3 is about self-reflection, recovering, examining yourself for prejudice, and that's where the 12 steps come in, because the 12 steps are about self-reflection and self-examination. That's the important part of the steps. So I have this. Well, what about the idea of God in the 12 steps? Does UI push God on its members? No, UI does not, has no intention of pushing spiritual ideas on, but the 12 steps adapted from Alcoholics Anonymous do refer to God. Some members do subscribe to those beliefs, but we have members that identify as atheists. We started this program in 2013, October 2nd, Gandhi's birthday, 2013. And I don't think we've had one discussion about spirituality or God since then. That's something you can subscribe to or not. All right, so the fourth pillar is activism, taking direct action to take action against racism. That might be giving funds to an organization like NAACP or Black Lives Matters, or an organization who is actually taking action against racism. It might be joining some of these organizations and participating. It might be getting involved in politics and standing behind, helping support candidates who are trying to put forward anti-racist ideas. All of those are direct action. So definitions for this conversation. Race, the term race is a fictitious term invented to try to classify humans into inferior versus superior groups based on a physical attribute such as color. In this country, it was color. While it's a made-up name, though, to justify racist policies, the mirage, as Ibram X. Kendi, if anybody's read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, still causes great harm. So it's still widely used, and we use it here to describe the mirage. Racist idea is identifying a perceived attribute in one person and then assigning that attribute to people of a particular color. Racial prejudice or racial stereotypes and racial tropes are all examples of synonymous with racist ideas. Racist policies are policies that result in maintaining widening disparities amongst racial groups. We'll talk more about that. Racism, racist policies plus racist ideas. You may have heard power plus prejudice. All right, so the opposite, anti-racist ideas that reject classifying morals, intellectual, or capability traits based on a person's physical attributes such as color. Anti-racist policies, policies that result in closing disparities amongst racial groups. And then anti-racism is anti-racist policies plus anti-racist ideas. Okay. I created this slide because I didn't know who would be in this audience, but it'll still be good to kind of consider who in this group believes that this statement is relatively, that there's some validity to this statement. Just raise your hand if you think there's some validity to this statement. Okay, and there may be even statistical data. As a matter of fact, if you Google it, there's lots of data out there from polls and things that show that over the years, especially like the last decade, that we have really become more politically polarized or just ideologically polarized. So since we have become so polarized, we're going to take a quick exercise to see how each of us identifies. Okay, so all the woke CRT Marxists, raise your left hand, and all the fear-mongering fascist racists, raise your right hand. All right. You may have guessed that I'm a tree-hugging liberal sheeple. All right, nothing personal, fascists. Okay, so that's really not accurate. Really, we're all on a spectrum, right? This probably more accurately describes where we land. I'm not a perfect anti-racist. If this spectrum is meant to look at the overt racist to the spectrum of pure anti-racist, whatever that might mean. So from KKK to MLK, right? And so my goal is to try to work those 4 pillars and drive myself closer to the MLK, Gandhi, Mother Teresa is questionable, but none of these people were perfect. Gandhi was known to have very anti-black, racist ideas as a younger person, and he grew out of those, and so nobody is perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm not, I kind of think of myself somewhere between allies and anti-racist. I'm somewhere under that anti-racist section, I hope, but there's no such thing as a not racist, according to Ibram X. Kendi. You're either racist or you're not racist. Dr. Kendi looks at it as like a peelable label, and he doesn't look at it as a tattoo, right? You're not tattooed racist or tattooed anti-racist. You are, it's a peelable label, and it is solely dependent on what you're doing or thinking at that particular moment in time. So while our divide exposed in conversations, debate, arguments over racism, sexism sometimes seems like a battle between them and us. Our society is more complicated, our belief systems are more nuanced. If we see ourselves on this spectrum, we can conclude that no one is perfect and no one is irredeemable. Yeah, great videos. If you ever have seen Daryl Davis or Valerie Coward, amazing. I highly recommend looking those up as far as no one is irredeemable, because both of them have made friends. Daryl Davis is black and Valerie Carr is Muslim, and they both have reached out to overtly racist groups, KKK members and stuff. And Daryl Davis has befriended over 200, who have given up their robes to Daryl Davis. So no one is irredeemable. If those KKK members aren't irredeemable, I'm not irredeemable. So most important is that we hold ourselves accountable and that we develop efficient communications for helping open-minded potential allies towards anti-racism. Okay, so if you're not a woke CRT Marxist like me, now's a good time to plug your ears. All right, racial disparity statement. This seems so obvious, but in today's country, this would undoubtedly be disputed. Slavery in this country is believed to have started in 1619 or before. That's based on a letter that was found talking about slavery, the earliest known article, and ended in 1865 after the Civil War. So the overt racist Jim Crow laws followed for another 100 years, so 345 some odd years of overtly racist policies. These have been, this has been there has been no time in our country to heal the racist lies and violent atrocities perpetrated during those years, right? Does anybody disagree with that? Like, have we had a time in our history where we've made amends for slavery other than stopping doing it and trying to stop overt racist laws? Maybe you can, there was the period of Reconstruction, but that was very short-lived. So only 55 years have gone by since the passing of the final civil rights bills in 1968. One result of the insanely long and extreme racism followed by insufficient attempts to rectify the past is that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are falling behind in general in every key indicator of success, including health, wealth, education, home ownership, prison statistics. So these are based on statistics of where black versus white versus whatever color fall in all of these categories, and the statistics are very clear that that black people are suffering in all of these areas. And so so you got to ask yourself, why is that? And I've heard lots of reasons why people think that is. And so we're going to take a little short quiz. that I like to give to people who come up with ideas that, to me, don't make sense. So I like to ask people, do you believe that white people are superior to black people in general, morally, intellectually, in intelligence, or any other way? And you can ask yourself this question, do you believe that? And most people that I've talked to will say no. No, I don't think white people are superior. Okay? If so, that's white supremacy, racist ideas, right? Thinking we're superior, white people are superior to black people is a racist idea. If you recognize that, know that these are incorrect racist ideas and want to change, great. So maybe you recognize inside of myself, well, I don't want to think this way, but I recognize that I have these at least subconscious thoughts usually that are kind of aligned with white supremacist ideas. But I know it's wrong and I don't want to do that. I recognize racist ideas in myself sometimes. Dr. Kendi, the black professor who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, said that he had racist ideas and he perpetuated those racist ideas in his early life. So no one's immune, right? It's not something to feel guilty about. That's part of the problem of racism. Is one of the best ways to keep racism alive is to make it this evil thing that nobody will admit to. I have racism within me, and I know that. And now that I know that, I can do something about it. Okay, so the good news is you could do something about it if you have the moral will. If you don't identify as a supremacist, continue to question 2. Do you believe in the USA has true equal opportunity? That means everybody has equal opportunity regardless of color or sexual identity and that white people have it no better or worse than black people, and that black people are treated equally by all major institutions, and racism does not cause racial disparities. So you can ask yourself that, do I believe that? And probably the majority of this group say no, we don't have equal opportunity, not by a long shot. But some people believe that. So the third question is, if you answered no to 1, you're not a white supremacist, and to 2, yes to 2, that you do think we have equal opportunity, because that's where a lot of people in the center of the curve kind of wind up. Is like, we don't have racism, No, I am not a white supremacist. I am not overtly racist, but we don't have a race problem. All right, we have equal opportunity. You just have to work hard and lift yourself up by the bootstraps, right? So this is addressing people who are in that camp. If you don't think you're a white supremacist, but you think we have equal opportunity, then it seems you're saying, no, I am not a supremacist, but the assertion that white people have preferential treatment, white privilege, over black people is a fallacy. Black people have just as much opportunity as white people, and there is no reason to try to level the playing field, and no injustices that only people of color face. Right? Does that make sense? If that is your sentiment, then continue on. So if you answered yes to number 3, that's your sentiment, and this identifies your sentiment perception, then this seems to present a dilemma. If the USA has equal opportunity for black people as for white people, and blacks face no racial hurdles, how do you account for whites excelling in every critical statistic, including education, wealth, income, poverty, housing, prison, clear struggling in general as a race? What do you think the reasons are? If we have equal opportunity, what do you think the reasons are? And I've heard reasons given, But to me, I identify them as racist ideas, because one of the reasons I hear is black people don't honor, black men especially, don't honor the nuclear family, right? So that's a racist idea. It totally discounts the 245 years of oppression, followed by no amends, no way to heal for generations of family who have nothing but poverty that was handed from generation to generation, while white people in this country even have had most of the wealth within white groups. So if you answer no to all of the above, then you agree racism is a problem in this country that prevents racial equity. If so, what do you believe are the problems preventing racial equity? And we're not going to actually go into that. I had committed to try to end by in a half hour, and I'm running out of some things, but one of the things I like to do is, do we have a microphone? Yeah. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play a video that I think is really good at succinctly kind of depicting the last kind of years of, hopefully this will, oh, you know what, do you guys have internet here? Let me see if I can find it. This one? Is it? But it's got a password, so.
Not that guarded. We have it on a piece of paper. We have it on a piece of paper in the back.
Be copying the password, everyone.
Is this a public domain video or just one of yours? Or?
It's a YouTube video.
Okay,
yes.
YouTube always checks when I upload videos of videos. So.
Okay. Yeah, is it okay to stream a video here? It's okay? Yes. (1492) 1492, when Columbus came. It's going to flash up 1619, slavery. You could think of the white people as not a family, but the population of white people in this country. And so, like a mob family, once you enter the family, then you're included in those resources. 1964, the civil rights, passage of civil rights. But still there's discrimination. Brown versus Board was in 55, but schools are still not equal. What do you think that did to family structures? marijuana, a lot of, yeah, if you ever watched the film 13th, that's a good one to learn about that. The war on drugs and how that affected. Oh, we're amazing. I want to make it clear I'm not anti-white, okay, but definitely it's clear, you know, like this, I think this video is a pretty good depiction of what has occurred in the history of this country. And, you know, you may dispute some of it, but these are the things that our country, the barriers that we erected that still haven't been completely healed in our country, right? Okay, so I don't have a written, thank you, don't have a written note, but hopefully if I just get it on the recording that this is a YouTube video posted by Erica Pinto. Is that sufficient?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So,
Do you want to open up the questions?
Yeah, I do. I have some questions coming up.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Okay. Let me go through here just kind of a quick, really high level. The Unity Initiative book has several pages of kind of key moments in time throughout our history, and still, it's not very. It's not comprehensive. So, but in 1492, Columbus comes, right, and making the beginning of slavery and atrocities brought on for Native Americans. 1619, based on a letter found about slavery, that's kind of marks what we consider the beginning of slavery for African Americans. Then 1877, after the Civil War, to 1960s, Jim Crow segregation. The Civil Rights Acts of '64 is probably the most helpful act. And then 1964 to present, self-perpetuating segregation, which is why we have beloved community as a pillar. Racist laws and policies, inadequate school funding, school-to-prison pipeline, continued discrimination in hiring and promotion practices. So while the 4-minute video we watched is a pretty good depiction of the high-level reasons for disparities that have evolved over the century, in what ways does the video fall short or gloss over our history?
You want to hear from?
Yes.
Anybody got a response to that question?
How does that video kind of gloss over? It's good, but still kind of glosses over.
Well, I noticed it didn't talk about class at all, which is definitely a thing.
It doesn't talk about class.
Yeah.
So class class and race can intersect for sure, but also there's some separate ways to address it. But yep, it doesn't talk about class.
What else? Anybody else got a response to that? Okay.
Even though it's a good overview, you know, like you mentioned, it is brief, right? And it is just a high level. It doesn't really help us to feel the impact in terms of the number of individuals that were impacted by these things and in the way they were impacted.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's what stuck out at me too, because it was depicted as individuals running against one another. There were 4 people running a race. It wasn't 4 groups of people. It was 4 specific individuals. That kind of stuck out at me, but anyway.
It displayed it sort of like something that was happening to the group, but not being perpetuated by the other groups in the race. That sort of creates a distinction there.
That's an interesting observation.
Yeah, that is a good observation. It doesn't really kind of there's maybe a lack of accountability there. Yeah, I think it really does not depict how the atrocities and how extreme the problems were. Has anybody in here heard of Dr. Joy DeGruy? No. Let me see. She has a great video. She has a lot of good videos. But this one, post-traumatic slave disorder, I think is that the one it's called. She gives a good history and goes into a lot more detail to show the realities, right? Okay, great. All right, what are the factors that prevent us from achieving equal opportunity, right? So this assumes that we agree that equal opportunity is not a thing. Is there anybody in here? I probably should not ask if there's anybody in here that believes equal opportunity is achieved. But if you do, maybe you could come talk to me afterwards. So if you agree that equal opportunity is not a reality now, what do you think we need to do to achieve that? What's preventing us from achieving that?
Oh, here we go.
School funding, not based
Oh, you want to take the microphone, because this is being recorded, right?
Yeah.
So school funding,
funding,
yeah. And what is it about school funding?
not based funds so locally so that the wealth of the whole state is shared instead of
'Cause-
neighborhoods getting less money for the schools.
Yeah, yes, 100%. So how is school funded? How is our schools funded? What's that? Property taxes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, property taxes. So if you are in a poor neighborhood, and especially if you're a black family who has, or maybe even came to this country after, but you still face discrimination and whatnot, and you're in a poverty, a poverty class that puts you in a school district that is only funded by by those property taxes, how can that possibly ever be fair? How can that be? There's no way that could ever be fair, right? Because funding this quality of school is definitely going to be affected by how well it's funded.
All right, we got another response back here.
Yeah, thanks. I think that one of the reasons we don't have equal opportunity in America is that, frankly, we have a huge segment of our population, roughly maybe a third of the people in America, who actually think that everything's okay, and that the reason that black and brown folks are behind white folks, it's their own fault. It's their own fault. As a matter of fact, just yesterday on a PBS show, Bonnie Urbe had some lily white lady brainiac who was basically saying, "Oh, it's people's individual faults. Mass incarceration is because people that are getting locked up deserve." This is absolutely infuriating, and politicians, especially guys like Ron DeSantis, are playing on this, and we need to stop it. Thank you.
All right, got another response up here. Excuse me, be right back to you. I'm gonna come here. Excuse me, Susan. Let me sneak on through.
I think playing back on the property taxes paying for school and things like that is, it's not so much that it needs to be equal. Everybody needs to get what they need. And I have 5 children, and kind of along those same lines, like I would have one that would get upset if somebody else got shoes. Well, you don't need shoes today, but they need shoes today. So I'm meeting your needs, and I think that's where this falls into. For us to have a more equal society, we need to be meeting the needs of all the people and not just equally distributing the money from property taxes to each school. Maybe this school needs more because they have this population, or whatever it might be. But I think it's, to get equal, you need to be unequal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely. It has to be done with thought and intelligence to make sure that it's done properly. Yes.
All right, got another response back here.
I have a question to you.
Sure.
Do you think it would help if we get rid of applications we get rid of race and sex and whatever else, ethnic group.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. Do you think it would help if on public applications we get rid of gender and ethnic groups and et cetera, race?
Sure, I think I understand the question. So I believe what she's asking is on applications for things like employment or public assistance.
On applications,
if we
okay,
if we
that's a
took
word I
those
didn't hear.
questions off and didn't ask applicants for their race, their gender, and all of these other things, would it be helpful to remove those questions?
I think it could be helpful, and also names, because there have been a number of studies that have looked at applications with ethnic sounding names and whatnot, and those people were by far and large passed over. But when their names were left off, then any way to identify the person's race, then they were much more likely to be chosen for employment. Yep, I think that's a good point. And also, yeah, to the gentleman's point back there, yes, we're all on this spectrum, right? And one of the things we got to be careful about is certainly there are people who are a lot more overtly racist than I have always been against overtly racist groups and stuff. Probably in my earlier years, maybe I would have considered myself maybe an ally. My mother was an activist in the civil rights movement, so I became aware of these ideas very early. I was fortunate in that, but most people are not, right? They're brought up in schools, and education in schools is whitewashed. Another reason why we won't be able to have equal opportunities because people aren't taught those values. And what's going on now in Florida and in this country of the CRT demonizing CRT, and most people who value these don't even know what CRT is. Certainly people who are demonizing it don't know what it is. So doing what they can to try to put a barrier so that we could continue to dilute our history.
And I don't know if I'm, as the host, if I'm supposed to, but I actually want to respond. I have a response to one of the discussion questions. Read
Yes.
that one that you asked about, the second one that said about why does equal opportunity not exist? And it really goes back to a lot of what Patrick was saying about the idea that there are just people who deny that the problem exists, and it's a lot of what it goes back to a lot of what you said earlier about that we all hold prejudices. We all have some twinge of that prejudice, possibly even you might use the label racist behaviors or at least thoughts. And when we deny that they exist, we forfeit our ability to confront and deal with them. We can't help the prejudices that we hold. We aren't able to stop ourselves from holding prejudices because it's just part of being a human, is that you have to function, you have to form judgments about things, and that's what a prejudice is. What we can do is change the way that we allow those to manifest in our behaviors and the way we interact with others. And I think that when we say things like, I don't see color, like, bull, you do, everyone does, you have to. You're just saying that. So anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's my response to question two.
That's a great response, and I agree 100%. If anybody, I know Robin DiAngelo and white fragility has been demonized quite a bit, even in diversity-minded groups and stuff. I've read her book. I don't know if anyone else has read her book. But just the idea of white fragility, I know I have white fragility. Like if a black person, a friend of mine, came up and said, Doug, that was racist, I would just feel so hurt, right? Now that I know about white fragility and know that in myself, I'm hearing what her suggestions were and other people who talk about that, I know that really that can be a really valuable feedback, and I don't have to take it personally. I don't have to, certainly, I might twinge on that, but I can stop myself and look at it and go and ask myself, oh, well, why are they reacting that way? Was that racist? Maybe that really was kind of a racist idea. Because guess what? I do have racist ideas sometimes. I recognize them in the way I stereotype people at restaurants. If somebody mentions somebody, doctor this or that, I'm imagining a white male, right? Because those are sexist ideas and racist ideas in my head. Does that make me an evil person? It doesn't make me an evil person. That's the way I was socialized. And so I started recognizing these racist ideas in my mind as a young adult, or I started finally maybe acknowledging them, and I said something to my mother, who's since passed away, but who I mentioned was an activist in the civil rights movement, and I felt really ashamed. And I said something to her about recognizing these, and I know they're not true, but I recognize that they come up in my brain. And she said, we are all products of a racist society. Right? We're all products of a racist society. And as Dr. Joy DeGruy says, we're all affected and we're all infected. This is a disease of our thinking, and we're all affected. And we all hold some form of prejudice. I'm not going to tell you that you have racist ideas in your head or that you have racial prejudice. That's for each person to decide on their own. But I know for sure that I do, even though I was a civil rights activist. So I'll get to you in one sec. So as Robin DiAngelo says, it doesn't matter if you were a civil rights activist. It doesn't matter if you have black friends or Latino friends or LGBTQ friends, that we hold these prejudices, that this is what we grew up with. And it's not about the good, evil label. We need to get away from that binary and just recognize that we're all affected.
All right. And we have a comment back there. I just want to point something out. In order to do the self-examination required to identify the prejudices that you hold that affect your daily decisions, you have to have a dose of that humility that I think somebody was talking about earlier in the program. I don't exactly remember who it was, but I feel like somebody else.
Yes, a while ago we were talking about how people identify themselves on paperwork.
Yes.
And I know what I'm going to say is impractical. So,
It's okay.
But I just thought, what if we could get rid of paperwork altogether?
I'm sorry, what if we could get rid of...
What if we could get rid of paperwork altogether?
Yeah.
I think, my identity is in paperwork.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with the way I classify, with the way my brain classifies and organizes things. So anyhow, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I love it. Oh. All right, go ahead.
I think this is an incredibly complex issue with literally millions of moving parts, and that the discussion is the important thing, and to be able to talk about this stuff. And I really applaud your efforts of creating a unity space for us to begin to examine all this and to learn. The fact is, there's plenty of so-called white people who are disadvantaged, and there's quite a few so-called BIPOC people who are enjoying great opportunities. Now, my question is, why don't we find these people who are actually succeeding and find out what they did, what their families did, how they were educated, why are they excelling in a world where others see only prejudice and discrimination? That's where I would like the investigation to go.
Yeah, and to address that, it's a really good point. There's I think somebody started alluding to there are some really strong black leaders out there. Candace Owens, Larry Elders, they're very conservative. What's that?
Kimberly Crenshaw.
Oh, Kimberly Crenshaw is very anti-racist though, right? Whereas these two are racist deniers, but Kimberly...
I'm just saying she's a great leader.
Yes, I'm sorry. So I don't want to classify her with these people though, because these folks deny racism as a problem, right? They're Larry Elders, Kimberly Crenshaw is amazing, and I highly recommend people getting to know
I was
Kimberly.
just saying inside that pool there might be some people who identify who can speak up from their
Yes.
experience against.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So So absolutely. So there are black people out there who deny racism as a problem, and say, kind of subscribe to the idea of that we have equal opportunity and you just need to lift yourself by the bootstraps and things like that. And certainly there is something to having opportunity and having and working hard. Those are definitely important factors, and those should definitely be. We should all, regardless of race, be educated on those kinds of values. What this is concerned with, though, is that in spite of that there are still barriers and things within our brains that keep us from helping there to be equal opportunity. So equal opportunity is a huge factor. And if we have a country that denies the barriers through our history, or denies their own prejudice because it's an evil thing and I can't be prejudiced, that's a bad thing, then they will subconsciously just go on their default mode and possibly discriminate as a result. That's the big concern I have about having internalized racism and not being aware of it is it will it can affect your behavior in a position of power, or a police officer with a gun, stopping a man on the street, somebody that is letting somebody into schools, somebody in a high position to hire. If you have those prejudices.
I had read that book, I just couldn't make myself do it. I mean, it was just too long. So I kind of got the Cliff Notes version. Okay, fine. Our friend Alexander Stevens, okay, vice president who argued that slavery was the cornerstone. Less than 10 years later, he writes a constitutional review of the late war between the states, 2 volumes, that the war was really about states' rights. So he spends his time contradicting himself. The myth is perpetuated to this day. Confederate General Edward Alexander furthered the fiction. As for the causes of the war, it will, of course, be understood that every former Confederate repudiates all accusations of treason or rebellion in the war, and even of fighting to preserve the institution of slavery. The effort of the enemy to destroy without compensation was practical robbery, which, of course, we resisted. Okay, that is the most circular of arguments. In other words, we weren't fighting about slavery, but you were going to take our property away, who happened to have been our slaves, without compensating us, and that's why we fought. Really, I mean, it's not that much more complicated if you take a lot of the verbiage out. He ignored, by the way, that Lincoln and the North continually offered generous compensation plans for slaveholders before and throughout the war as late as 1864. Lincoln was always trying to end this by this compromise, and in fact, even when it was going to happen, he kept doing it as a political expediency to show that this was the purpose. He recognized the unanimity and the desperation of our resistance, even to the refusal of Lincoln's suggested compensation at Fort Monroe after the destruction had already occurred, clearly showed our struggle to have been for the right of self-government. So even in his own justification, he recognized that Lincoln was still going to compensate, which was not about us not compensating anyway. Now, this is just the introduction to his book on different battles in the Civil War, but I mean, it doesn't take a lot of ability of critical thinking to cut through this very quickly. The right of self-government violently denied not only every black person, but most poor whites. History books go to war. Racist professors gave the myth an academic gloss. Burgess and Dunning, I think he was a political scientist and a historian, created this, what was called the Dunning School. All of these little PhD students started writing this stuff at Columbia University, and it was just presented Reconstruction as a disaster. Its fundamental problem was granting black men vote because they were congenitally incapable of exercising it. His adherents celebrated the KKK as defenders of democratic self-government. So I will tell you, by the way, that on the campaign trail, whenever I give a speech to black people, they are the most discerning and insightful of voters because they know the value of what they have. Now, Contemporaneously, Massachusetts Senator and Vice President Henry Wilson writes The Rise and Fall of Slave Power in America and correctly identifies slave power as the Civil War's cause. Later, W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America, debunks the Dunnings both in his scholarship and his person. This guy was brilliant. Spoke several languages, spoke ancient Greek. But enter the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Existed to perpetuate the mythology of the lost cause. Because their fathers and grandfathers could not have sacrificed for something as ugly as slavery, they recreated the history. Northern aggression caused the war. Slavery was a benign institution. Perpetuated the myths by putting textbooks in schools throughout the South. They venerated the KKK. At its 1913 annual National Convention, the United Daughters unanimously endorsed the Klan. By the way, it's August 2018 website still stated, slaves for the most part were faithful and devoted. Most slaves were usually ready and willing to serve their masters. Now, this is 2018. Wow. Now, by the way, if you go on their webpage now, they kind of cleaned up their act a little bit. But this is from 2018. W.D. Griffith's silent film Birth of a Nation ends with the disenfranchising, rearming blacks. This movie probably started the Ku Klux Klan back in existence. First Hollywood blockbuster, kind of high production qualities.